Minister, there is a crisis in home care services in this state, a crisis which your government refuses to acknowledge. The level to which older and vulnerable people are being failed has been exposed by a report by HICWA which was published last night. The report makes for very concerning reading, and it calls for a complete overhaul of home care services. It has highlighted several key areas where the home care scheme is falling down. Waiting lists are sky high, and we know that almost 5,000 people are waiting for access to home care. They have been approved, but they are waiting. These are 5,000 vulnerable people who are waiting for a carer to be assigned to them. This is absolutely unacceptable. It causes massive stress and worry, not only for the person, but for their families. This is happening because the government is not resourcing and staffing home care services adequately. There is simply not enough staff to fill the places available. And this government, and I've seen it in the budget, you can allocate all of the funds and all of the hours and set up all of the schemes that you want. But it will not work for the people who matter if we don't have the staff in the first place to deliver that home care service. The end result is that far too many people who need care in their homes wait and wait and wait. They wait in hospitals when they should be discharged, or they wait at home struggling with nobody to help them. The HICWA report also underlines the urgent need for regulation of home care services. A recent PQ response I received from the Department of Health confirmed that the government still has not established or developed a plan to regulate home support services. Minister, people will be listening in disbelief today. They will find it incredible that there is no state oversight of home care services on which so many of our older and most vulnerable people depend on. In 2021, there is no minimum standard of care when it comes to home care services. That is absolutely frightening. The state continues to wash its hands of its responsibility to ensure a high-quality level of care and protection for those people who rely on home care, our most vulnerable citizens. And it is a damning indictment of not only this government, but of successive governments as well. The government's failure in the area of home care services has real consequences in people's lives. As I said, older people are being left in hospitals or left in nursing homes for respite, and they cannot get home. In my own area, there are 660 people who have been approved for home care packages, and they are still waiting. People in dire need of assistance in their homes feel abandoned, Minister. They are left by themselves to struggle through their days while facing real challenges every single hour. These are people whose mobility is gone in some cases. They are people suffering with dementia, people who are coping with long-term illness. That is a very tough and lonely situation for anybody to be left in. Minister, it is time for the government to show up for those who depend on home care services. The first thing we must do is get more staff into the system so that vulnerable people are not left waiting on waiting lists. This needs to start with community employment. There are over 2,330 vacancies, many of which are related to community health. Minister, I am asking you to give a commitment on behalf of this government to ensure that these vital roles will be filled with urgency.
Thank you, Deputy Kerrane.
Thank you very much, Deputy Kerrane, for raising this very important issue. And I want to highlight the work that is ongoing within government and indeed the HSE to address what is an important issue across all of society. As you know, the government is committed to establishing a new statutory scheme for the financing and regulation of home support services, which the Department of Health is currently developing. It is the view of government that many older people want to stay in their own home, rather going to a long-term accommodation setting. And it is our job and indeed our duty to facilitate that as best we can. And that is why the Government has provided extensive resources in the last 2 budgets in particular to address this issue. The new scheme will provide equitable and transparent access to high-quality services for people based on their assessed care needs. And as you know, it is very much based on the assessment of the needs of each individual. I think it's important to point out that the number of people waiting for funding approval of home support or for a carer to be assigned has reduced from over 9,000 at the start of last year to approximately 5,300 at the end of September of this year. And of course that is too many, but it is still a significant reduction in the number of people awaiting for funding. But of course what people want is access to a service, and that is what the Government is committing to providing. And I want to acknowledge the enormous efforts of my colleague, Minister Mary Butler, in leading on this issue. She has committed to establishing a cross-departmental strategic workforce advisory group to examine workforce challenges in home support and indeed in nursing homes. I think it is important to point out the level of additional funding that has been secured by Minister Butler, additional funding of €150 million for home support, and this year's HSE National Service Plan sets a target to provide 24 million home support hours, which is 5 million more hours than was provided for last year. It is estimated that at the end of October this year, some 17 million hours had been provided to about 54,000 people. This is about 2.5 million more hours compared to the same period last year. So notwithstanding the undoubted challenges that are there in relation to recruiting home carers and people to provide this vital service, there has been a very significant increase in the level of service and indeed the number of hours that has been provided this year relative to last year. The funding secured in Budget 2021 to provide these additional 5 million hours has again been maintained for 2022. I do acknowledge the point that you have made in relation to staffing, and it is an ongoing challenge for the HSE to recruit the staff necessary to provide this service, and that can result in delays between the funding approval for an individual and the delivery of the home support hours, and that is what really matters to the individual, and we accept that. It is the delivery of the service in their own home. There has been a steady increase in the number of people waiting to receive home support in recent months, but it's important to note the total number of people waiting for home support across both categories, that's those waiting for funding or indeed waiting for a carer to be assigned, has reduced very significantly. So I referenced earlier the cross-departmental strategic workforce advisory group that the Minister has committed to establishing. The role of the group will be to facilitate the views of stakeholders and to examine workforce challenges in home support and nursing homes. Potential areas to be examined there will include recruitment, retention, training, career development and the sustainable employment of home care workers for the future. As you know, a call for submissions to identify key issues and to inform the establishment of the group was announced recently on Friday the 3rd of December, and the project team in the department will now analyse submissions received to inform the setting up of this group in early 2022, and we look forward to your support and indeed your engagement in how we make progress on this issue.
Thank you, Minister. Deputy Kerrane.
Minister, I do note you've made no reference at all to the HICO report, which I referenced, that was published last night, and that makes for really concerning reading. It is calling for a complete overhaul of these services, so clearly it is not working. And you've referenced the waiting time for funding has reduced, and that's welcome. But it's reduced in that people are getting their funding, and that's welcome. But they're then moving from a waiting list for funding to a waiting list to actually get that care. So while the funding may be sorted out in relation to reduced times for that, the issue is in actually getting the care. So people are being approved for home care and then they are not getting it. They're moving from one waiting list to another. And again, you've mentioned the additional funding and 24 million home support hours. Again, that is welcome, but it's not if we have nobody to provide those hours, and who is going to provide them? I've put forward one example in relation to community employment, and this will be particularly helpful in rural areas like Roscommon, like Galway, like Mayo, where we have those 660 people who've got their funding but haven't got their care. And at this time of year, as we approach Christmas, and you've said it, older people want to be at home, their families want them to be at home. We have a crisis here, and I'm not hearing enough from you in relation to what you're going to do about it. And that legislation in relation to oversight is absolutely essential and needs to come very quickly.
Thank you, Deputy Minister.
Thank you very much, Deputy. Just to assure you that Minister Butler is working on the legislation in relation to the important issue of oversight and is examining the HICWA report that you have referred to, and the Minister will engage directly with HICWA in relation to that and will not fall short in taking the necessary steps to ensure that there is a proper system of regulation and indeed that standards are upheld at all times. I note the points that you have made, but I would also make the point that we have seen a significant increase in the actual hours provided. So the Minister has secured an overall budget of €666 million, which is a very significant increase. We want to translate that extra budget into a very significant increase in the number of hours provided, and that does mean identifying people to provide the services. The Minister will examine the specific suggestions that you have made in relation to community employment scheme participants and what role that they might play. So we are committed to making further progress on this issue, and I think the new group that has now been established by the Minister to examine the workforce issues is now the channel through which we can make further progress on this issue and provide the services in the homes that people most want and which the Government are very anxious to provide. Thank you.